Most people don't fail because they lack opportunities. They fail because they've never made a decision serious enough to change the trajectory of their lives. They want to be different. They hope for more, but they keep living the same way. And the truth is, desire has no power. Only decisions do. For many years, I've watched this repeat itself again and again in others and in myself as well. People don't lack dreams. We talk a lot about change. We know exactly what we need to do to make life better. But knowing isn't enough. Wanting isn't enough. The gap between a life that's drifting and a life that's moving forward isn't found in motivation, and it isn't found in circumstances. It lies in one very specific moment, the moment you stop negotiating with yourself. There are people who live for years in the same loop, the same worries, the same habits, the same "I'll do it later" promises. Not because they're weak, not because they lack potential, but because they've never drawn a clear line with themselves, a decision that doesn't allow turning back. Then one day, something changes. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. They stop asking, "Should I?" They say, "I will," starting now. And from that moment on, everything begins to shift. Not because the world changes, but because the way they move through the world has changed. In this video, I'll share the core principles behind that shift, the principles that separate interest from commitment and trying from seeing things through. And stay until the end, because the final principle may help you recognize what's quietly holding you back and how to move past it. Principle 1. Nothing changes until you decide. There comes a moment in life that, if you miss it, every effort afterward is just spinning in circles. It's not when you read another book, not when you listen to another inspirational talk, and it's not when you feel ready. That moment only arrives when you make a decision. A lot of people confuse wanting with deciding. They say, "I want to change," but deep down they still leave an escape door open. They want better results, but only if things are convenient. They want a different life, but they don't want to disturb their current comfort. And so they get stuck, not quite failing, but never moving forward either. A decision is different. A decision doesn't sound hesitant. A decision doesn't say, "Maybe, we'll see," or "when it's convenient." A decision says one very clear thing: I'm doing this, no matter how I feel today. I used to think change required strong motivation. But then I realized, motivation is just the spark. Decision is the switch. When the switch isn't flipped, everything stays dark, even if you're holding 1,000 candles. Look back at your own life. How many times have you said you'd start being serious next week? How many times have you believed that just a little more inspiration, a little more confidence would make everything fall into place? But next week looks like last week. Next month looks like this month. And next year isn't much different from this year. Not because you don't know what you need to do, but because you've never closed the door behind you. A real decision always comes with a cost. It forces you to give up the right to choose every day. It sounds paradoxical, but that surrender is what creates freedom. When you haven't decided, you argue with yourself every morning. Should I do it today? Am I too tired? Can I skip it just this once? And every time you argue, you burn energy not on action, but on hesitation. But once you've decided, that inner debate ends. You no longer ask, "Should I?" You only ask, "How?" And that's when life starts to move. I've seen people stuck for years, financially, physically, directionally. They don't lack ability. They don't lack opportunity. What they lack is an irreversible decision. They always leave themselves a safe exit. If it doesn't work, forget it. If it's too hard, stop. If they're tired, take an indefinite break. Then one day that changes, not because circumstances improve, but because their internal standard rises. They no longer accept living in limbo. They stop comforting themselves with reasonable excuses. They decide that continuing the same way is what's unacceptable. That kind of decision doesn't need a loud announcement. It shows up in small but decisive actions. You no longer try to wake up early, you wake up early. You no longer attempt to manage your money, you set limits and follow them. You no longer say you're working on it, you finish. From the outside, nothing may look different right away. Your life may appear the same, the job is the same, the challenges are still there. But inside, something crucial has changed. You're no longer someone who's considering. You're someone who's chosen a direction. When you haven't decided, you live by emotions. When you have decided, you live by principles. Emotions come and go, principles stay. And it's principles that carry you through days with no motivation, no inspiration, and no encouragement. One thing I've learned from people who truly go far: they don't wait until they're certain they'll succeed. They're only certain they won't go back to who they were. They decide to leave the starting point and accept that the road ahead may be rough. You don't need to know every step. You don't need to see the whole picture. You just need to decide that moving forward is the only option. Ask yourself not to answer anyone else, but to face yourself honestly. In the most important area of your life right now, are you wanting or have you decided? Are you leaving the door open to go back or have you locked it? Because the truth is this, life doesn't change according to your desires. It changes according to the decisions you're willing to live with every day. And until that decision is made, every plan is just an intention, every hope just a promise hanging in the future. Nothing changes until you decide. And the moment you decide, you're no longer the same person. Principle 2, interested is not committed. After someone says they've decided, there's still another boundary many people never notice. That boundary lies between interest and commitment. This is where most people get stuck for years, sometimes their entire lives. They're interested in their careers. They're interested in their health. They're interested in having a better future, but interest isn't enough. Interest is just a mental state. It shows up when things are comfortable and disappears the moment life becomes inconvenient. Commitment is different. Commitment is acting regardless of how you feel. A lot of people live under the illusion that they're moving forward simply because they read books, listen to podcasts, watch motivational videos. They feel busy. They feel like they're doing something. But if you look closely, their lives aren't moving. The reason is simple. They're interested, but they're not committed. Interest says, I'll do it when I have time. Commitment says, I'll make time to do it. Interest says, I'll try. Commitment says, I'll do it, even if today isn't ideal. And you can hear the difference just by listening to the language someone uses. People who are only interested talk about the future. People who are committed talk about present action. I've met many smart, capable people who speak eloquently about what they're going to do. They have plans, they have vision, but year after year, nothing changes. Not because they're lazy, but because they never cross the line from interested to committed. Interest makes you feel good. Commitment makes you pay a price. And here's what few people want to face. You can't keep comfort and demand major change at the same time. Those two don't coexist. When you're only interested, you keep the right to choose what's easy. When you're committed, you give that right up. Commitment means you no longer ask, do I feel like it today? You ask, does this align with the person I've decided to become? That question changes everything. Look at the areas you say you're interested in. Take health, for example. Many people say they care about their health, yet they eat carelessly, sleep irregularly, skip movement. They're not lying. They genuinely care. But they're not committed, and that's why results never come. Money is the same. Some people say they care about financial stability, but they don't track spending, set limits, or change habits. They hope things will just get better. But money doesn't respond to hope. It responds to discipline. Interest is emotional. Commitment is structural, and emotions aren't reliable. They rise and fall with the weather, with mood, with circumstances. If your life is built on emotion, it collapses under pressure. But when it's built on commitment, you have a solid foundation, one that doesn't depend on how you feel today. There's something interesting. When someone is truly committed, they become quieter. They don't talk much about plans. They don't need to convince anyone. They just do the work. And that silence isn't a lack of passion, it's because they're busy executing. People who are only interested like to talk. People who are committed like to improve. You can see this clearly in how someone responds to obstacles. When things get hard, interested people look for reasons. Committed people look for solutions. When things don't go smoothly, interested people delay. Committed people adjust. Commitment doesn't mean you're never tired. It means you don't let tiredness decide for you. You keep going, not because you're always strong, but because you've chosen not to return to the starting point. One of the biggest mistakes is thinking commitment must come with intense emotion or high motivation. In reality, it's the opposite. Commitment is often quiet. It isn't flashy. It shows up in early mornings no one sees, in small choices no one praises, in doing what needs to be done, even when nothing feels special. And it's those quiet choices that create lasting results. Notice this. Your current life reflects your past level of commitment, not your level of interest, not your level of knowledge, but how willing you were to act when no one was forcing you. If you're only interested, you stop when things get hard. If you're committed, you adjust to keep going. This is the moment to ask yourself honestly, in the most important area of your life, career, health, finances, or personal discipline, where are you? Are you interested or are you committed? Commitment doesn't need perfection. It needs consistency. You don't have to do everything right from the start. You just can't quit every time things get difficult. You don't need to move fast. You just need to move steadily. And when you cross this line, when you stop confusing interest with commitment, something important happens. You begin to respect yourself more. You believe your own words because you see yourself act on them. And that self-respect becomes the most sustainable form of motivation you can have. Not everyone who's interested changes their life. But everyone who changes their life has, at some point, committed in silence, in discipline, and on days when no one applauded. Principle: 3 serious people stop negotiating with themselves. One very clear sign of someone who is truly serious about their life. They stop negotiating with themselves. Most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because every day they enter a silent negotiation in their own minds. A negotiation they very often lose. I don't really need to wake up early this morning. I'm tired today, I'll make it up tomorrow. Skipping it once won't hurt. Each of these small negotiations may seem harmless on its own, but when added together, they shape an entire life. People who aren't serious let their emotions take the wheel. They ask how they feel before they ask about their goals. They let mood decide action, and when mood drops, action disappears. Serious people are different. They don't ask, do I feel like it today? They ask, does this align with the standard I've set for how I live? And when the answer is yes, they act. No further debate required. Negotiating with yourself sounds reasonable. It carries a tone of compassion, gentleness, even maturity. But in reality, it's the most subtle way to delay responsibility. Every time you allow yourself to break a principle, you teach yourself a dangerous lesson. Your word isn't reliable. At first, you only break it in small things. You skip one workout. You delay an important task. You bend your financial discipline just a little. But very quickly, those small exceptions become the new standard. And you start living by lower standards without even realizing it. Serious people understand one thing very early. Every negotiation is a lowering of standards. They don't refuse to negotiate because they're rigid, but because they understand the cost of leniency. Leniency today is always paid for with regret tomorrow. Watch how a serious person lives on days no one sees. No audience, no praise, no special motivation, just habits and principles. They still do what needs to be done, not because they're always strong, but because they closed the door on debate a long time ago. As long as you're still negotiating, you're keeping an escape route open. And as long as there's an escape route, you'll use it, especially on hard days. But when you stop negotiating, action becomes much simpler. Not easier, but simpler. You no longer waste energy deciding every day. You've already decided. Now it's just execution. I used to think discipline meant forcing yourself to do things you don't like. Later I realized this. True discipline is freeing your mind from endless arguments. When you're clear on who you are and the principles you live by, life becomes far less exhausting. Serious people aren't perfect. They still make mistakes. They still stumble. But they don't use mistakes as an excuse to give up. They correct and return to course. No complaining. No justifying. No dramatizing. Here's the difference. People who aren't serious use emotions to explain their behavior. Serious people use principles to correct their behavior. And principles only have value when they aren't negotiable. Think about any area of your life where you feel stuck. Chances are that's where you allow yourself the most negotiation. You say it matters, but whenever it clashes with comfort, comfort wins. Serious people understand that not every day requires intense determination, but every day requires consistency. And consistency doesn't come from emotion. It comes from clear boundaries that you don't cross. When you stop negotiating, something interesting happens. You start respecting yourself. You doubt yourself less. You no longer need to constantly push or scold yourself. You act because that's who you've chosen to be. And from that point on, your confidence is no longer based on words or intentions, but on evidence that you do what you say you will do. Stopping negotiation doesn't mean becoming rigid with life. It means being serious about what you say matters. You can be flexible with tactics, but not with standards. You can adjust how you do things, but not why you do them. When someone reaches this point, they're no longer pulled around by small emotional waves. They move slower but steadier. They talk less but do more. And day by day, they accumulate something very few people have. Solid trust in themselves. Not because they're special, but because they stop negotiating with their future And when you stop negotiating, life starts answering you with results. Principle 4: casual habits create casual lives. After someone has decided, committed, and stopped negotiating with themselves, there's still something quiet but extremely dangerous that can pull them back to the starting line. That thing is casual living habits. Many people think their lives aren't moving forward because they lack big opportunities. But the truth is usually much simpler. They're living with small habits that are too lenient. Not seriously wrong, not catastrophic failures. Just casual, sleeping 10 extra minutes in the morning. A day where you allow yourself a break. Postponing something important because today is already busy. Each of these choices on its own doesn't create obvious consequences. But when they become habits, they create a life that's just as casual, not bad, but going nowhere. Casual habits don't destroy your life in one day. They wear it down over time. People who live by casual habits are often very busy. They do many things. They always have reasonable explanations for why they haven't moved forward yet. But when they look back years later, they can't point to any clear period when life truly shifted direction. Everything just continues in the same loop. The problem isn't that they do nothing. The problem is that they do nothing consistently enough to build momentum. Casual habits always speak in a comforting voice. They whisper, "It's fine. Just one more time. Everyone does it." And if you're not careful, that voice becomes the dominant one in your life. Serious people understand one thing: life isn't shaped by rare big decisions, but by small habits repeated over time. And if those habits lack discipline, the results will lack depth as well. Watch how someone manages very ordinary things. How their morning begins, how they treat their time, whether they complete what they plan to do. There, you'll see their future more clearly than in any declaration they make. Casual habits always create casual standards. And casual standards can only lead to casual results. People who live seriously don't do things randomly. They don't let days pass without structure. Not because they're rigid, but because they understand that if you don't intentionally shape your day, circumstances will do it for you. Casual habits keep you living in reaction mode. Whatever comes first gets handled first. Whatever is loud gets priority. Whatever is important but not urgent gets pushed to when I have time. And when I have time never comes. When you live like this long enough, you start believing you're truly busy. But in reality, you're just lacking direction in how you use your energy. You burn effort on too many small things, leaving nothing for what could actually make a difference. One of the clearest signs of casual habits is this: starting many things but finishing very little. You're excited at the beginning, but you can't sustain the rhythm. You like the feeling of starting, but you avoid the dull middle where real results are actually created. Serious people are different. They respect the unexciting phases. They understand that quiet repetition is what builds the foundation. No one sees it, no one praises it, but that's where capability and resilience are formed. Casual habits also distort how you see yourself. Every time you skip something you know you should do, you send yourself a subtle message: I don't have to keep my word to myself. Over time, self-trust erodes, not because of big failures, but because of too many small broken promises. In contrast, when you build serious habits, even very small ones, you start creating evidence that you're reliable. You don't need massive motivation. You just need to do the small right things every day. The difference between a drifting life and a directed life often lies in very ordinary actions. Waking up on time, finishing what you promised, preparing instead of reacting, keeping rhythm even when there's no inspiration. No habit is small when it's repeated long enough. Casual habits give you a sense of freedom in the short term. You're not constrained, you're flexible. You're living comfortably. But the price of that comfort usually shows up years later when you realize you've gone very far, just not in the direction you wanted. Serious people don't reject enjoyment. They just don't trade their future for temporary ease. They understand that discipline isn't punishment, it's respect for the person they want to become. If you want to know what your life will look like in a few years, don't look at your dreams, look at your habits. Are they serious or casual? Are they moving you forward or keeping you where you are? Because the truth is very simple. Casual habits create casual lives. And when you change how you live each day, you begin to change the entire trajectory of your life quietly but irreversibly. Principle 5: standards, not desire, shape your future. The truth many people avoid is this: your life isn't determined by what you long for, but by what you accept. Everyone has desires. Everyone has imagined a better version of themselves. But desire is cheap. It doesn't require you to change how you live. It only asks you to imagine. And that's why desire exists in most people while results do not. What truly creates the difference isn't what you want, but the standards you set for yourself. Standards are the invisible boundaries that decide what you allow into your life and what you don't. You can say you want a better life, but if your standards still allow procrastination, excuses, and half effort, then the end result will still reflect those standards. I've met many people who say they want to be more successful, but when I watched how they lived, I realized they accepted far too many things beneath what they claimed was important. They accepted staying up late constantly, accepted working without focus, accepted broken promises to themselves, and then they were surprised when life didn't move forward. Life is always honest. It doesn't listen to what you say. It responds to the standard you live by every day. When standards are low, everything can be justified. Missing a day becomes "it's fine." A week of delays becomes "I've been busy lately." And very quickly you begin living in a gray zone, not bad enough to force change, but not good enough to make you proud. Serious people don't stay in that gray zone for long. They raise their standards not to pressure themselves, but to protect their future. They don't ask, "What's the minimum I can do?" They ask, "What is unacceptable?" And that question changes behavior. When your standards rise, certain things automatically disappear from your life. Old habits no longer fit. Familiar excuses start to sound empty. Not because you learn something new, but because you no longer accept them. High standards don't mean perfection. They mean clarity. Clarity about who you are. Clarity about how you use your time. Clarity about what you allow to repeat in your life. There's a big difference between knowing what you should do and not accepting not doing it. Serious people belong to the second group. They don't need constant motivation because their standards have replaced motivation. When you raise your standards, you start acting from principle, not emotion. You don't work out because you feel like it today. You work out because the kind of person who lives at this standard doesn't skip that. You don't work seriously because someone is watching. You do it because that's how you respect yourself. And here's what matters. Standards aren't revealed on good days, but on bad days. When you're tired, when you're busy, when no one is watching, that's when your standards show. Do you lower them for convenience? Or do you hold them, even if only at the minimum required level? People who aren't serious often lower their standards on hard days, then hope they'll raise them again tomorrow. But that tomorrow rarely comes. Serious people do the opposite. They keep the standard and adjust the intensity if needed, but they never lower the boundary. When standards rise, life can feel harder at first. You have to say no more often. You have to face discomfort. But at the same time, something else happens. You begin respecting yourself more. And that self-respect creates a positive loop. You act better because you believe you deserve a better life. Your life will never exceed the standards you set for yourself. You might get lucky a few times. You might run into unexpected opportunities. But in the long run, everything returns to the level of standards you accept. If you accept procrastination, you'll live with slow results. If you accept superficiality, you'll receive superficial results. If you accept breaking promises to yourself, you'll live in self-doubt. But when you raise your standards, even just a little, everything begins to shift. Not loudly, not immediately, but surely. Ask yourself bluntly, right now, in the most important area of your life, what is your real standard? Not what you say out loud, but what you live by every day. What are you accepting that deep down you know you shouldn't? Because the moment you stop accepting it, your life starts moving in a different direction. Not because you want more, but because you no longer accept less. And from here, every principle that follows becomes clearer. Once your standards have risen, you'll understand why things you once considered normal are no longer acceptable. And that's the sign you're truly stepping into a different level of living. Principle 6, what you tolerate becomes your identity. A quiet but extremely powerful rule is operating in everyone's life. What you allow to repeat gradually becomes who you are. Not what you declare, not the goals you write down, but the behaviors you allow to exist day after day. At first, that tolerance looks small, skipping once because you're tired, saying, "It's fine," one time, lowering expectations to feel less pressure. And because it doesn't create consequences right away, you believe it's harmless. But life doesn't operate through massive collapses. It operates through quiet accumulation. Everything you tolerate sends yourself a message. This is acceptable. And when that message repeats long enough, it's no longer just behavior, it becomes identity. I've seen many people who never chose an average life. They just tolerated it little by little. Tolerated being late. Tolerated doing just enough to get by. Tolerated promising and not following through. And over time, they began believing that's just who I am. But no, That's only what you've gotten used to accepting. There's a huge difference between a mistake and tolerance. A mistake happens and you fix it. Tolerance happens and you allow it to stay. That staying is what shapes who you are. Serious people understand. You don't have to change everything at once. But you do have to be very clear about what you will no longer allow to repeat. Once that boundary is set, life starts restructuring from the inside out. Look at the areas where you feel stuck. Chances are there's a list of things you've gotten used to tolerating. Undisciplined habits, loose time use, familiar excuses. You didn't choose them. You just didn't end them. And the most dangerous thing about tolerance is that it blurs your sense of right and wrong. What used to bother you now becomes normal. What used to embarrass you now becomes acceptable. Not because you got worse, but because your internal standard has been worn down. Serious people don't wait until things are completely bad to act. They notice small signals. They recognize that if today they allow themselves to live below their standard, tomorrow it will be easier. And the day after that, it becomes a habit. So they cut it off early, not with anger, not with self-blame, but with a clear-minded decision. This no longer fits the person I'm building. When you stop tolerating, something very interesting happens. You don't need as much motivation as before. You don't need to push yourself as hard, because the right behavior is no longer a hard choice, it becomes the norm. You no longer ask, am I going to do it today? You ask, am I still willing to accept not doing it? That question is stronger than any encouragement. Tolerance also deeply affects how you see yourself. Every time you allow yourself to act against the standard you set, you erode trust in yourself. And on the other hand, every time you hold the line, even in a very small way, you reinforce the identity of someone reliable. Not everyone needs to know you're changing, but you'll know. You'll feel the difference in how you walk, how you speak, how you respond to temptation. You no longer have to prove anything. You just have to live in alignment with what you've chosen. Serious people don't build identity with words. They build it with what they don't allow. They don't allow themselves to slide into procrastination. They don't allow weak language to lead their actions. They don't allow small habits to destroy the bigger picture. And slowly, their lives begin reflecting that identity. Not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. Ask yourself with absolute honesty, right now, is there something in your life you're tolerating, while deep down you know it no longer fits? Is there a behavior you keep justifying because it's familiar? Is there a standard you lowered to avoid discomfort? Because the moment you stop tolerating, you're not just changing a habit, you're declaring something much bigger. I choose to become a different person. And life always respects declarations backed by action. You don't need to become rigid. You just need to become clear. Clear about who you are. Clear about what you're building. Clear about what is no longer allowed to cross the line. When you can do that, the new identity doesn't come from one explosive moment. It comes from quiet consistency. From the days you choose to do what's right when no one is watching. From the times you say no to your old self. And then, one day, you look back not to celebrate loudly, but to realize you've come very far. Not because of one big turning point, but because you no longer tolerated the things that pulled you down. Principle 7, the line you draw changes how you walk. There's a very specific moment in every person's journey of growing up. Not loud. No one applauds. But from that moment on, you walk differently. It's when you draw a clear line. Before that line exists, everything is vague. You know what's good, what you should do, but you still leave the possibility of going back to the old road. You give yourself exceptions. You give yourself special cases. And because of that, you live in a halfway state, not exactly giving up, but never truly committing either. The line appears when you tell yourself one short but decisive sentence. From here on out, I'm not going back. Not because you're sure you'll succeed, but because you're sure that continuing the same way is unacceptable. Before the line, you walk slowly, hesitantly, always looking around. You try, then stop. Start, then quit. Not because you're weak, but because you're still standing at the crossroads. And at that crossroads, every step feels heavy. After the line, your walk changes. Not faster right away, but steadier. You don't have to keep turning around as much. You know where you're going, or at least you know where you're not going anymore. Serious people don't need a perfect vision. They just need a boundary that can't be negotiated. Once that boundary is set, so many things fall away automatically. Old habits no longer have a place. Familiar excuses stop working. And the interesting part is you don't have to struggle the way you used to, because the line clarifies your role. You're no longer someone who's considering. You're someone who has chosen. I used to watch very closely the people who truly changed the trajectory of their lives. What they had in common wasn't superior intelligence or favorable circumstances. What they had in common was this: there was always a moment when they drew a line with themselves. Someone decided they would no longer live in debt. Someone decided they would no longer let their health slide. Someone decided they would no longer avoid personal responsibility. Those decisions didn't come from inspiration. They came from a deep exhaustion with repeating the same self. And once the line has been drawn, the way you move through daily life starts to change. You wake up with a different feeling. You say no more easily. You don't need to explain as much. Not because you've become cold, but because you've become clear. This clarity has a very positive side effect. It significantly reduces mental energy drain. Before, you had to keep deciding everything again. Am I doing it today? Am I skipping it today? But once there's a line, many questions disappear. You don't have to rethink what's already been decided. And that's when action becomes lighter, not because it's easy, but because it's no longer blocked by hesitation. The line also changes how you respond to temptation. Before, temptation was a debate. Now it's just a signal you notice and move past. Not because you're stronger, but because it no longer belongs in the life you've chosen. People who don't draw clear boundaries often live in a constant state of testing. Anything can pull them off course. But people who have drawn a line are different. They don't need to win every battle. They just need to not cross the line they've set. There's something important to understand. Drawing a line isn't an extreme act. It isn't cutting yourself off from the world. It's selection. You choose what's allowed to exist in your life and what isn't. You don't become rigid. You become consistent, and that consistency begins to create a new identity. Others may not notice right away, but you will feel it. You move differently. You speak differently. You react differently. Not because you're performing, but because you're living according to your line. If you've never drawn a clear line, you're probably living in the state of maybe. Maybe you'll do it today. Maybe you'll rest tomorrow. Maybe you'll change. Maybe you'll do it later. And maybe is where a lot of potential gets buried. Because life isn't built on possibilities. It's built on boundaries. Ask yourself honestly, in the most important area of your life right now, where is your line? Have you truly said enough yet? Or are you still leaving the option open to return to what you know is dragging you down? The moment you draw that line, you'll realize something clearly. You don't need to become a different person immediately. But you're no longer the old person either. And from that moment on, every step you take, even if slow, moves in the same direction. No more loops, no more drifting, just one clear path, guided by the boundary you drew with your own hands. Principle 8, structure, is what keeps you serious. A truth many people don't want to face. A decision can change your direction, but only structure keeps you on track. A lot of people have had a wake-up moment. They draw a line. They say enough. They feel clear, strong, determined. But a few weeks later, life pulls them back into the old rhythm, not because they lied to themselves, but because they didn't build structure to protect their seriousness. Emotion can start change, but emotion can't sustain it. Structure takes over when emotion disappears. People who aren't serious often live off excitement. When they feel motivated, they do great. When motivation drops, everything collapses. Serious people are different. They understand daily life can't depend on mood, so they design life in a way that doesn't require emotional permission. Structure isn't rigidity. Structure is a decision repeated in advance, so you don't have to decide again every day. Watch someone who's truly serious on ordinary days, not the days they feel inspired, when nothing special is happening. You'll see they don't fumble around asking what to do next. They already know. Not because they're better, but because their life has order. Structure starts with simple things. The time you wake up, how you begin the morning, what gets prioritized when your energy is high, what gets saved for later. When these aren't set ahead of time, you live in reaction mode, handling what's urgent and forgetting what matters. And when you live in reaction long enough, you start thinking you're extremely busy. But in reality, you're just missing direction for your energy. Serious people don't let randomness run their lives. They don't wait for the perfect day. They create days with a stable rhythm. Not perfect, but clear enough that they don't slip off course. Structure is also how you protect the standards you've set. Once you raise your standard of living, you need a system to keep that standard from being worn down by fatigue and busyness. Otherwise, high standards only exist on paper, not in real life. One of the biggest mistakes is trying to live with discipline in a chaotic environment. You let everything be messy, your time be disorganized, your space filled with distractions, then you blame yourself for not being strong enough. But discipline doesn't survive well in chaos. It needs order. Structure helps you do the right thing, even when you don't feel like it. Not by force, but by reducing friction. When things are arranged, the right action becomes the easiest option, and the wrong option becomes inconvenient. Serious people don't rely on pure willpower. They know willpower is limited. Instead, they use structure to conserve willpower for decisions that truly matter. They don't want to fight themselves every day. When structure is in place, you don't have to ask, should I do it today? You just follow the rhythm you've already set. And that rhythm creates sustainability, the one thing motivation never provides. Structure also changes how you see yourself. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to become disciplined. You start seeing yourself as someone who lives in discipline. Not because you're better, but because your environment and habits are supporting it. And this is important. Structure doesn't have to be complicated. It has to be repeatable. A simple structure that you follow will beat a perfect plan that gets abandoned. Serious people choose durability over flash. They don't look for a new method every week. They look for ways to do the basics well, day after day. Structure also helps you get through the phases where you used to quit. When you're tired, structure is still there. When you doubt yourself, structure still points the way. When you're discouraged, structure doesn't argue, it just asks you to continue. And over time, something almost magical happens. You no longer have to stay serious. Seriousness becomes the default. Not because you're always determined, but because your life is designed not to allow you to slide. Ask yourself, right now, what is your seriousness built on? Built on temporary inspiration? Or built on a clear structure that can support you on hard days? Because if you truly want to change the trajectory of your life, you don't just need the right decision. You need a system strong enough to keep that decision alive through daily life. Structure doesn't take away your freedom. It frees you from repeating failure. And once structure is in place, seriousness is no longer something you have to hold on to. It becomes how you live. Principle 9, consistency beats intensity every time. A very common misunderstanding keeps many people starting over again and again. They believe change requires high intensity. It has to be aggressive, explosive, doing a lot in a short time. And when they can't maintain that intensity, they conclude they lack discipline, lack willpower, or aren't strong enough. But the truth is the opposite. It's not high intensity that changes your life, it's consistency. High intensity creates a powerful feeling. You feel like you're doing something big. You're motivated, you're excited. But that feeling doesn't last. It's like a big wave, fast, strong, and then gone. And when the wave pulls back, if there's no foundation, you end up right where you started. Consistency is different. It's quiet. It doesn't impress, but it builds. Serious people understand that life doesn't reward impulsive effort. It rewards actions repeated long enough. You don't need to do more than others in one day. You just need to do it more steadily across many days. Think about any valuable skill, health, finances, career, or mental toughness. None of it is built through a few bursts. It's formed through small actions repeated when no one is watching and when there's no special feeling pushing you forward. High intensity often comes with high expectations. You expect results quickly, and when results don't come as expected, you get discouraged. That discouragement isn't because you're weak, it's because you put your expectations in the wrong place. You expect speed. While life runs on accumulation, consistent people don't ask, how much can I do today? They ask, what level can I sustain long term? That question changes how you act. Instead of going all out and burning out, you choose rhythm. You choose actions small enough that you don't need to debate them, but important enough to create progress. And that rhythm keeps you moving on tired days. One of the biggest traps of intensity is that it gives you a reason to quit. When you set the bar too high for each day, you're more likely to fail your own standard. And every failure makes you tell yourself, if I can't do it fully, I might as well stop. Consistency doesn't give you that excuse. It doesn't demand that you be extraordinary every day. It only demands that you show up. And showing up day after day is what makes the biggest difference. Serious people aren't obsessed with perfect days. They focus on keeping the chain unbroken. They understand that a bad day, where you still do the minimum, is far better than a perfect day, followed by disappearing for a week. Consistency also changes how you see yourself. When you keep the rhythm, even a small one, you start believing you're someone you can rely on. Not because you always succeed, but because you don't quit on what you've chosen. And that belief accumulates into resilience. You stop panicking when a day doesn't go well. You stop treating every setback as proof you're not cut out for it. You see it as a normal part of the journey, High intensity often traps you in all or nothing. Consistency lets you live in the middle where progress actually happens. You can be slow, but you don't stop. You can be tired, but you don't turn back. Notice this. The people who go the farthest aren't the ones who start the strongest. They're the ones who stay the longest. They don't need to impress anyone. They just keep going. Consistency also protects you from temporary emotions. Once you're used to showing up, you're no longer dependent on motivation. You do it because it's your rhythm, not because you feel excited today. And that creates real freedom. You aren't dragged around by up and down days. You don't have to get motivated again every week. You just return to the rhythm you chose. Ask yourself bluntly, in your past efforts, did you fail because you lacked ability or because you tried to do too much in too short a time? Did you choose intensity to prove something, or did you choose consistency to build something? Because if you truly want to change your life, you don't need to live extremely. You need to live persistently, not doing more but doing it more steadily, not running faster but not stopping. High intensity makes you feel strong for a moment. Consistency makes you become strong over time. And over time, that consistency will take you where bursts never can. A life built solidly day by day without noise, but irreversible. Principle 10. Your environment is either helping you or hurting you. Here's a truth many people overlook when they talk about discipline and determination. You don't live and act in a vacuum. You live in an environment. And that environment, whether you're aware of it or not, is pulling you every day. A lot of people blame themselves for lacking willpower. They think that if they were stronger, more focused, more determined, everything would be different. But they don't realize they're trying to build a serious life inside an environment designed for distraction and ease. Willpower wasn't built to fight non-stop. Willpower was built to be supported. Serious people understand this. If you have to use too much willpower to do the right thing, sooner or later you'll burn out. So they don't just change behavior, they change context. Look around you. What is the space you're in telling you every day? Does it encourage focus or invite distraction? Does it help you remember what matters or constantly pull you away from it? You don't need to answer out loud. Just watching how you act in that space is enough. Environment doesn't argue, it shapes. When the environment is cluttered, the mind struggles to stay clear. When everything is always open, it's hard to hold boundaries. When you're surrounded by signals that invite procrastination, you don't have to be weak, you just have to be human, and you slip. Serious people don't take pride in resisting the environment. They design the environment so they don't have to resist. They understand that if they want focus, they have to remove what distracts. If they want discipline, they have to make the right choice easier than the wrong choice. This isn't only true for physical space. It's also true for the people around you. You can have strong determination, but if you're in an environment where superficiality is normal, where quitting always has a reasonable excuse, where low standards are constantly sympathized with, you'll be swimming upstream every day. And swimming upstream is exhausting. Serious people don't hate anyone. They don't look down on others. But they're very aware of the pull of a social environment. They know the conversations you join, the stories you hear, the norms accepted around you all quietly define what normal means. If normal is procrastination, you'll procrastinate. If normal is half effort, you'll give half effort. If normal is being serious will feel much more natural. Serious people actively choose environments that make them rise, not shrink. Not always comfortable, but always directional. They don't look for constant encouragement. They look for high standards. Environment also includes what you take in every day, what you read, listen to, and watch. You can't grow a focused mind if you feed it distraction every day. You can't maintain high standards if you're constantly exposed to messages that lower those standards. Serious people are selective, not because they're closed off, but because they understand attention is the most valuable asset. And they don't let that asset be drained by things that don't serve the person they're building. When the environment is adjusted, something important happens. You don't have to try as much as before. The right actions become more natural, not because your personality changed, but because the pull around you changed direction. This is why many people change quickly when they enter a new environment, a new job, a new group of people, a new living space. Not because they suddenly became someone else, but because the new environment demands and reinforces different behaviors. You don't have to wait for the environment to change randomly. You can actively rebuild it. Bit by bit, remove one source of distraction, add one clear boundary, cut out one habit that drags you down, add one habit that lifts you up. Serious people don't see this as extreme. They see it as responsibility. Responsibility to the standard they've set. Responsibility to the future they're building. Ask yourself honestly, Is your current environment supporting you in becoming who you want to be, or is it constantly pulling you back to who you used to be? Is what's around you making the right thing easier or harder? Because the truth is this: you can have the right decision, high standards, and strong discipline, but if your environment fights all of it, you'll pay a very high price to maintain it. Serious people don't choose the harder path just to prove themselves. They choose the better supported path so they can go farther. When your environment starts working with you instead of against you, you'll see something clearly. Seriousness stops being a daily fight. It becomes the default state. And from there, progress stops being rare. It becomes inevitable. Principle 11. Seriousness is an identity shift, not a mood. There's a very dangerous misunderstanding that makes many people think they're not ready yet. They believe seriousness is an emotional state, something that comes and goes with mood, energy, or circumstances. But the truth is different. Seriousness isn't a feeling. It's an identity shift. When you treat seriousness like an emotion, you wait for it. You wait until you feel determined enough. You wait until you feel confident enough. You wait until everything clicks. And while you're waiting, life keeps moving without waiting for you. Serious people don't wait for a feeling to give them permission to act. They act because that's the person they've chosen to become. That's the key difference. When you act from emotion, you need constant refills of motivation. When you act from identity, you don't have to convince yourself every day. You do it because it's who you are. Pay attention to how you talk about yourself. I'm trying to be more disciplined. I'm getting used to focusing. I'm on my way to changing. Those statements sound reasonable, but they still place you in the position of someone trying, not someone who is. Serious people speak differently, often in silence. They don't say, "I'm trying to manage my time." They live like someone who values time. They don't say, "I'm practicing discipline." They live like someone who has discipline. This shift doesn't happen in one explosive moment. It happens quietly, through repeated choices. Every time you do the right thing without any emotion behind it, you send your brain a new message. This is who I am, and the brain learns fast from evidence. When you repeat it long enough, the new identity starts to form. You no longer see yourself as someone who has to force yourself. You see yourself as someone who doesn't do it any other way. Not because you're perfect, but because you've changed roles in your own story. Someone who hasn't shifted identity keeps asking, "Do I have enough motivation today?" Someone who has shifted identity asks, "Does this align with who I am?" The second question is far more powerful. It doesn't depend on mood, it's based on self-perception. And when your self no longer allows a certain behavior to exist, that behavior gradually disappears without a fight. When seriousness becomes identity, it doesn't make you more tense. It makes life lighter. You don't have to make hundreds of decisions every day. You already know who you are, and that eliminates a lot of unnecessary choices. You don't have to weigh whether you should procrastinate because that's no longer your option. You don't have to argue with temptation because it doesn't belong in the life you've chosen. Serious people don't need to look serious. They don't need to declare it. They don't need to prove it. Their new identity shows up in small details: being on time, being consistent, finishing what they start, keeping promises to themselves. And most importantly, they don't return to the old person every time their emotions drop. Emotions can change, but identity doesn't swing day to day. A lot of people fail not because they aren't strong enough, but because they keep returning to the old role whenever things get hard. They're serious when it's convenient, but loose when it's inconvenient. That creates an exhausting loop. Start, get discouraged, start again. The identity shift ends that loop. When you truly see yourself as a serious person, going back to old habits no longer feels comfortable. It becomes incompatible. You don't have to hate it. You simply don't belong to it anymore. Ask yourself very directly, right now, are you living like someone who's trying to change, or like someone who has chosen who they are becoming? Are you acting in hopes that one day you'll be different, or are you acting from the recognition that you already are different? Because the moment you stop waiting for emotion and start living from identity, seriousness stops being effort. It becomes the foundation, and from that foundation, every principle that follows discipline, structure, consistency has solid ground to stand on. You don't need to turn yourself into a new person overnight. You just need to stop returning to the old person every time it's inconvenient. And that refusal to go back, repeated again and again, will create the new person in a way that can't be reversed. Principle 12. The cost of staying casual is regret. Very few people recognize the true cost of living casually. Not right now, not in a day or a month, but over time. That cost is regret. Regret doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't knock on the door on a specific morning. It comes quietly, accumulating through every time you knew you should do something and didn't, through every time you said later, through every year you believed you still had time. Staying casual doesn't destroy your life immediately. It wears it down. You don't see loss in each individual day. One casual day looks like any other. But when those days stack up, you start to feel an emptiness that's hard to name, the sense that you could have become someone else. Not better than others. Just aligned with your own potential. Regret doesn't come from failing. It comes from never fully committing. You didn't lose because you tried your hardest. You lost because you never crossed the boundary of comfort. And the most painful part of regret is this: you can't blame anyone else for it. Not circumstances, not lack of opportunity, but because you accepted a lower version of yourself for too long. A lot of people think living casually is safe. They avoid pressure, avoid risk, avoid failure. But they don't realize that safety comes with a huge bill, and that bill gets delivered later. When you look back and ask yourself, what if I had gotten serious earlier? That question has no answer. Only wait. Regret isn't only about what you didn't achieve. It's about the skills you didn't develop, the relationships you didn't build, the opportunities you didn't prepare to receive. Unused potential doesn't stay still. It fades. Not because you aren't good enough, but because you weren't serious enough to keep it alive. Serious people don't live in fear of failure. They live in fear of facing themselves in the future and knowing they didn't give their best. And that fear, when faced honestly, becomes a very clear kind of drive. Not impulsive drive, but deep drive. Life doesn't reward casualness. Even if it feels comfortable at first, it rewards those willing to pay early so they don't have to pay late. Because the cost of discipline is always lighter than the cost of regret. It's just paid daily instead of all at once. When you live seriously, you might be tired, but you aren't tormented by the question, what if? When you live seriously, you might be wrong sometimes, but you don't have to hide from yourself. Staying casual lets time pass without leaving a mark. Years move very fast when you're not building anything. And then one day, you realize you've been very busy, but you haven't gone far. That's the cost. Serious people don't need to live tense or harsh. They just live intentionally. They don't let life drift on inertia. They don't let identical days repeat forever. They understand time isn't managed. Time is spent. What are you spending it on? Every day you procrastinate. You're spending time on repetition. Every day you avoid what's hard. You're spending time on standing still. And every day you aren't serious, you're buying another piece of regret for your future. But here's the important part. You haven't lost anything until today. Because regret only becomes permanent when you keep living casually after you've recognized it. The moment you become aware of the cost, you have the right to choose differently. No need to wait for the new year. No need to wait for the perfect time. No need to wait for anyone's permission. Seriousness doesn't require you to change your whole life in one day. It only requires you to stop repeating the things you know are pulling you down. And if there's one thing you need to remember when this video ends, it's this. Your future life isn't determined by what you hope for today. It's determined by how serious you're willing to live starting now. You don't need to become extraordinary. You just need to stop living casually. And the moment you do, even quietly, the trajectory of your life begins to change in a way you can't return from. If you feel like these things hit you, it's not because they're new. It's because you've known them for a long time. You're just facing them more directly today. If you want to keep walking this path, the path of discipline, resilience, and personal responsibility, subscribe to the channel, not to watch more videos, but so every time you come back, you're reminded of who you've chosen to become. We don't need a lot of people, just serious people